Thanks, Anna, and thanks everybody. And yes, so Gemma, I'm the other end of your flu. I hope you don't sound like me in a week's time, but at least I feel fine. So there's an upside. Anyway, so welcome everybody, and I'm really excited to be part of this Digital Fireside because sustainability has been part of my journey for a really long time, both personally and professionally. So I think you all know they can't possibly need introducing, but let's introduce them all the same. Michelle Carvill and Gemma Butler, who together wrote Sustainable Marketing, which is becoming a bit of a handbook, I think, for business. Michelle and I were talking the other day. The broader definition of marketing, and definitely not the 1P of marketing, which sometimes is how we marketers get viewed, isn't it? We're all about promotion, and people think it's just about changing, I don't know, for recycled paper in your mailings or whatever it is you might be doing. I'm showing my age now, aren't I? So really what we want to explore with Michelle and Gemma this afternoon is the journey they've been on, and especially I think the last 12 months or year or so since you published Sustainable Marketing, because I think you've both had a lot of things happen to drive you to create that book. But I think interestingly as well, what else has been happening since then, the impact it's had, the doors it's opened for different conversations and what you've been learning. So why don't we just, kick off there? Michelle, why don't I start with you? Just just briefly tell us what drove you and Gemma together to come together and write the book, but then, where it's been taking you in the last year.
For sure. So very potted history. Gemma and I had met through the Chartered Institute of Marketing. Gemma was the marketing director there. I've been a fellow there for many, many years. And I suppose whenever I met Gemma and another colleague of ours, Geraint, we would often have a good old moan about the role of marketing. And Gemma and I actually went to was it the House of Commons or the House of Lords? The House of Commons it must have been, to debate the role of marketing and how marketing had kind of lost its way and was, as you said, Caroline, seen as this 1P of marketing. And we were like, no, it's got to get back to strategy and brand and values and purpose and, all that juicy, good stuff that marketing impacts and can't operate really without being across all of those things. And so that was really a frustration. And Gemma and I would often meet, have a couple of cocktails and a bit of a moan in the pub, and we decided that actually we should probably stop moaning and start thinking about putting something together about how we felt and where the profession was going, and also the huge responsibility that the profession had with regards to the role that it plays strategically around responsible consumption and responsible marketing. And that led us to write Sustainable Marketing, how to drive profits with purpose. And of course, in the writing and the researching of all of that kind of opened our eyes to a whole other level around areas that we didn't really fully know or hadn't really explored around sustainability, and it opened our eyes to things like, we'd heard of the UN SDGs, but what was this framework and how was this operating? And then of course we researched deeply into things like plastics and waste and all sorts of different areas around sustainability, and then we were kind of like, oh goodness, marketing's really not behaving in that responsible way right now. So what can we do to help? And that led us into where we are, I suppose, right now, which was this idea that marketers, if we didn't know about this stuff, and we've been in the profession, 30 years or so, and thinking we're pretty responsible, then others are unlikely to know this stuff. And as marketers, we can get a little bit siloed sometimes, we can get a bit pushed into the P side. And so we wanted to kind of focus on driving what sustainable marketing is, getting marketing back to being what marketing should all be about, but also with a hugely responsible lens. And that meant that where we had to start with education. So Gemma and I both went back to educating ourselves, formally, informally, and becoming carbon literate and to developing carbon literacy training. Gemma championed carbon literacy within SIM and also developed a professional qualification within SIM. So we all work together to kind of support how that could be. And so now Gemma and I are in a position where we are focused on the continuation of that education and awareness to marketers. We set up a manifesto. We're very much flying the plane as we're building it, and we are just doing as much as we can do to drive impact around education and awareness. And we just formally formalized our podcast, what started off as our podcast and then our website that kept growing with our learning zone and various other bits and pieces, to become a limited company. So Can Marketing Save the Planet is now a formal limited company, and Gemma and I in 2023 have got lots of plans about how we now just extend that and continue the work that we've kind of fallen into, that feels right, and that we're finding is so necessary. I mean, we just received fantastic messages and we've met the most fabulous groups of people, and it just feels like good work.
Fantastic. Gemma, can I pick up a bit with you on that education aspect of that and SIM? I mean, all marketers, know about SIM, but this feels quite groundbreaking, what you've developed with SIM around sustainable marketing.
Yeah, it wasn't really on CIM. CIM has a really broad remit, from digital to brand to SEO, all the way through to email, really across the top, and then all the verticals. And so when I started talking about sustainable marketing and sustainable transformation, people didn't initially pick it up as something that sits as an umbrella across the whole of the marketing profession. So I did talk about it to the point where they got so bored of me, they'd let me just start doing what I wanted to do, really. And suddenly, through all the conversations that I was having and the interest, because we CIM partners with 130 universities in the UK. The universities started talking to me. I started guest lecturing at some of them on sustainable marketing, and then it was suddenly a piqued their interest. And it was with that and just simply not stopping that I championed, as Michelle said, the development of the first regulated qualification in sustainable marketing. Michelle developed courses for their open training. We made our content a massive focus for sustainable marketing, and we even held a sustainability summit just before I left. So now it sits really as an umbrella for everything, because it does sit, sustainability and brand go hand in hand. It goes in hand in terms of what you do with your websites, what you do with your channels, greening your channels, and even marketing as a function has a carbon footprint associated with it. So what you do as a marketer, ultimately you can have some level of control on your own carbon footprint. So it suddenly became sustainable transformation. CIM was leading the charge there and was one of the only voices leading the charge, and I think that's really grown out in the last year.
And I'm interested because I have others as well, because it seems to me there is this, it's a both and. It's how marketers do what they do more sustainably, and it's how marketers use their position, which is a very privileged position, really, isn't it? As marketers, we look inside the organization and we understand the part of the strategy and the voice of the employees and all of that, but we're very much the voice of the customer and perhaps the voice of the partners, the voice of the marketplace. So really well placed to drive business-wide strategic transformation that some people would say, oh, that's not marketing. I would personally say it absolutely is. And like you, Gemma, the reason I got involved with sustainability back in IBM way back in 2007-8 was because I would not stop going on about it. And eventually they just sort of said, well, go and, go over there and figure it out. You can think about it. Because it seemed like something missing, But how's the balance between those two things are you finding when with the people you talk to, the people that you lecture to, between that, how do we make our marketing more sustainable and how do we make our business more sustainable?
Go on, Michelle.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, they're kind of inextricably linked, aren't they? Realistically, but I don't think everybody thinks of it that way. And so I suppose, and again, this was why we came back to writing the book and the work that we're doing. It's really to help organizations understand the opportunity that this brings to them, to kind of get everybody on the same page and to understand the opportunity that works across the whole value chain of the organization when it comes to sustainability. And as we said right at the outset, you know, marketing is really well positioned for that, because, as you say, on the inside piece, we have to understand brand, values, purpose, the products, the services, the culture of the organization. You know, we may also be the bodies aligned with internal communications. You know, we should definitely be speaking to internal communications if that's separated out, again, depending on different sizes and structures of how things are operationally managed. But then on the outside of the organization, we are the custodians of brands. We are the people sharing the inside of that business to the outside, sharing those values, sharing those, you know, the purpose, the products, the services. But at the same time, on the outside, we're having to listen to what's going on the outside and understand the changing needs of the audiences and the stakeholders that we serve, the changing needs of that landscape and how that business landscape we're operating in has shifted, and also see what our competitors are up to, see what the opportunities are, and look at the innovations and the changes and the shifts, and then bring those insights back into the business for strategic steer. And even if it isn't being driven strategically, you know, at that point, which, you know, we hear all the time that sustainability is the, you know, number one driver now on most boards, etc., etc. It's still for the marketers to be, when they are presenting, when they are thinking about what it is they're doing with their activities, to kind of ask that question about, well, is that product, you know, what are we doing with the end of life of that product? What are we doing with helping our audiences to become part of the circularity of that product? You know, once marketers understand the changing landscape, the opportunity, and they're educated, aware about sustainability and the opportunities that brings around reducing waste, around circularity, around product innovation, around getting customers on board and employees on board to be part of the sustainability solution, then it starts to help the marketer to ask a different set of questions and to start to really be that connective tissue across the value chain that is just not just educating, but also asking those questions, and in some cases maybe challenging the organization where it isn't thinking more broadly and more innovatively about the opportunities that sustainability can bring. So I think that there is a tension, because I don't know how many marketers feel really comfortable with all of that, because I certainly wouldn't have done 5 years ago, before I started learning about this space. I would have felt very out of my depth to be challenging anything about, oh, what's the circularity of that product? How do we bring our audiences into that? But this is where the education and awareness is so critical, because that business landscape is shifting. There are things that marketers need to understand about how that is shifting, and that opportunity of learning all of that actually creates more opportunity for the marketers to be better marketers, to be driving that more internally, and to be working across the value chain to support the shift, to support the changes, to build the business cases, to support the innovations, and be that kind of conduit that works across. So I think that there is still probably tension at the moment between, and maybe a bit of a gap, but that's what we need to do as marketers. Once we're educated and aware, we are the perfect people to actually go and do this. So it's just about getting educated.
Yeah. How receptive have you found people? I mean, is it the normal spectrum? Is it the old bell curve?
I think people have, once we start talking to people, they've been really receptive, and in fact some people have written to us and said that, you know, they were at the point of wanting to leave the profession, because as they sort of started to become more aware of the impacts of of the role that they do as part of, you know, the environmental crisis and waste and all of that, then they were thinking that, you know, they don't want to be part of that machine anymore. So, but then having a look at what they can do if they use their powers for good, as we say, and use their skills and try and build those business cases for change, actually it's given them almost a new lease of life in terms of wanting to stay in the profession and change from the inside, you know, change the organization, how it thinks, and be a real enabler of progress. Because I guess with the role we do, we're either going to speed progress up or we're going to slow it right down, aren't we? And we have that choice to make. So yeah, people have been really, really receptive in terms of all of the people that we've spoken to. There have been people that are completely in denial, they're naysayers, you know, they don't want to know. And that's a really hard conversation to have, because you don't want to get on, I certainly struggle, I don't want to get on my activism, you know, bandstand and start, you know, shouting stuff at them and stuff like that. But it's how you have the right conversations. And I think, like anything, when you're communicating, you have to change how you talk to people and the stories you tell to get them really to come in and understand and want to understand that we need to drive those changes. So it's been a mix, but on the whole, hugely positive, and actually wanting to know more and more and more, which is incredibly rewarding when we know that there's people out there that are getting real value out of what we've been doing for the last 3 years.
I mean, that's fantastic. But I'm really interested in your point on people who were feeling marketing might not be the right career choice for them going forward because consumerism and all of that. But actually working with you guys, it's enabled them to go back with a fresh approach, because probably they're the ones best placed to drive change at that point, aren't they? Because they'll be, you know, if they're successful within their organizations, they'll be trusted, and it's not some new person coming in full of activism and, you know, trying to sell everything. It's actually, I can see how that plays out. I'm also really interested what things have surprised you as you've gone on this journey of, you know, engaging with all these other organizations. Surprises, good ones, bad ones?
Good, I suppose good surprises is that where we are, I don't think we thought we would be doing this, and that is a good positive surprise. And the surprise of how I suppose generous and supportive the whole sustainability environment networks seem to be. You know, there really is this sense of everybody pulling together, and that's really unusual and very joyful, and makes life a lot easier. On the bad surprises, I suppose, you know, I've done quite a lot of talks and into large groups of organizations and sectors organizations, and I suppose on the bad surprise is that I'm surprised that sometimes we're operating in this bubble, or we feel like we're operating in this bubble. And when you step out of that bubble, you realize that businesses have very clear priorities and that sustainability isn't one of them. And yet, you know, it's difficult to kind of, once you are educated and aware, and you're looking at the IPCC reports and you're looking at the urgency and you're looking at these timeframes and you're thinking about the limits that we've got, the boundaries of decarbonisation, you know, it's almost like ignorance is bliss, because it surprises me that businesses aren't pivoting, kind of doing a 360 about where they are right now, given what we know about what is potentially coming if we do not make the changes that we need to change. And I think that for me, the urgency just doesn't seem to be there. And that surprises me, given the science, given the facts, given the data. And I understand it. I understand it from a business perspective. You know, it's not easy to do. None of this is easy, but I just feel that sometimes I do feel like that Professor Mindy, you know, in Don't Look Up, where I do feel that I am getting slightly hysterical, that nobody is actually taking this as seriously as they need to be doing. And I appreciate it's a journey, and I understand we've got to do things, but at the same time, you know, I'm training in carbon literacy, and I'm thinking, well, if this science is correct, we really need to be speeding up these transitions. And it does seem that the science is correct. And so that surprises me, that more leadership isn't being urgent around just how urgent this is. And that goes for governments around the world, that goes for huge organizations. And as Gemma said, you know, the naysayers that just say, you know, you see it all the time on Twitter. I have to kind of, you know, close my eyes sometimes. But so yeah, that's one of my surprises.
I echo the sort of the bad surprise being that, you know, certainly with climate change, this is not a new conversation. It's not a new problem that's just happened, you know, and the fact that, you know, for probably the last 20, 30 years, you know, greenhouse gas emissions has been a subject of discussion. Businesses and overdeveloped countries have known about it, yet we have 40% higher emissions now than we did in 1990. It's almost like we heard that there was a problem, we've just ignored it and accelerated, you know, and just gone gung-ho for it. And I think there are some big corporates out there who should be so much further ahead than they are, and they should have been leading this change, you know, and taking up the opportunity probably a decade ago. But it's almost like that was too difficult. It's easier just to keep going. So I'm quite disappointed, you know, in that. I think good surprises for me is my knowledge of social impact companies and the rise of social impact companies and the absolutely amazing work they do. You know, the Too Good To Go's, the Tony's Chocolonis, the Who Gives a Crap. So, you know, packed coffee. I think they're doing stuff that is, you know, is delivering good outside all the markets they operate in, and I think that they've given me a real hope that we can, you know, change the course we're on. And I think they're some of the most exciting companies for Gen Zs and millennials to go and work for. And I absolutely, you know, if I ever went back into working for somebody, I think I would absolutely go for a social impact company, because that feeling that they give you that you're doing good every day is, you know, you can't really replace that right now.
No.
Well, yes, so very true. And it is, the lack of urgency is extraordinary, but I feel we see it across so many facets of human life that unless the thing is actually causing us, and I mean us as individuals, pain today, we're really, really quite bad about dealing with it, aren't we? And then you scale that up to a business or a nation state or whatever, and it does feel like a lack of belief that it is existential. This crisis, and you know, and part of the problem maybe is the language. For too long we've allowed people to talk about saving the planet, and actually the planet's just fine.
Oh, the planet will be
absolutely
great. It's the humans,
the human race that's in jeopardy, you know. So yeah, that is a challenge. So for all of us, so we're all here because probably we're all believers anyway, but what are some of the things that you've seen and that you write about, or that you explored in your podcasts, that are really great ways of organizations and marketers getting onto that front foot and enabling themselves to be heard, to drive the kind of change that we're looking for?
I've got a couple of experiences from organisations I've been working with on the carbon literacy training, and it's really, there was one organisation who are a global wellbeing. They have wellbeing centres around the world, and their CMO came on the carbon literacy training so that he could test it out to see what it was going to be like for the rest of his team, really. And that was, he was almost doing the recce for the training, and then he came back on another training, a different course, because he said, oh, it was really useful and I didn't know any of this stuff, and now I really feel ignited to learn more. And when he was on the second training, I was talking about some of the examples of things, and he said, oh, Michelle, I can give you a great example. You know, following the carbon literacy, there was some really quick wins that I thought, oh, we can make these changes. So we changed our menus in our restaurants. And he said, we feed over 1 million people. And he said, so this is sizable impact. And he said, so I put the business case to say, look, because we're decarbonising, let's look at having more plant-based menus and changing the balance between plants and meat. Let's just shift the percentages from 80-20 to 50-50. And I can't remember the exact calculations, but he's going to send it all to me as a case study. But he shifted it, and he said, what was incredible was that we ran the calculations then, and of course we could see the impact that we were making on the decarbonisation, which was significant. The other byproduct of that was the cost savings. He said we didn't realise that, of course, this was saving us a whole load of money. He said, and it was in that meeting when I was feeding that bit back that the rest of the C-suite, pricked their ears up and said, whoa, hang on a minute, what's going on this? What more could we be doing? And I think that comes back to maybe another surprise, Caroline, is that there is a huge opportunity for businesses here with regards to driving more sustainable business, not only for the survival of that business, and also this support to the people and the planet, that we talk about. But even if you were to just look at the commercial strength of your business moving forward, where are they looking ahead to strategically when they're thinking about the finance, the financial aspects, if they are not thinking about the sustainable aspects of that business commercially? The business will not be commercially viable in the way that it's operating. So they have to be rethinking some of these areas. And of course, there are enormous benefits in doing so. And so for me, I just thought, wow, that's just what seemed like just a simple shift, but actually had really positive impact on the carbon, really positive impact on the byproduct of the well-being side because of all the associated benefits of having a more plant-based diet, and of course the cost savings to the business. So I keep seeing, and I know Paul's written extensively about it in his wonderful book, this idea that, Gemma and I researched this heavily, and we mention it in our book, this idea that good business is good for business. Commercially, this isn't a hardship. This is actually strengthening those businesses and all those social impact, organizations that Gemma and I have met, that we've interviewed, that we've talked to, that we've researched. They don't even think about doing marketing. Their marketing is everybody just loves what they do and talks about it. So, it's really interesting that these businesses are almost, their success is self perpetuated because they are good businesses doing good business.
It's a wonderful thing, Michelle. I mean, everything you just said pretty much just defines a sustainable business, sustainable as in here for the long term, healthy for the future. And people think about it narrowly in terms of environment, but society and profit are, they're not out of the equation.
No,
we can be ambidextrous. We can do it all.
And I think that's what's opened up, just this journey has made me excited about marketing again, because suddenly it's gone from, it's not all about digital. It's not all about, selling as much as you can, as quickly as you can, and not thinking, and, that in any wider lens. And again, these social impact companies, they've brought back, word of mouth. They've brought back trust. They've brought back, reviews and social marketing and cause marketing and all the really exciting stuff that you kind of learn about on your journey. But we've all been thrown down this digital void, haven't we? That's all you do. And I think this is, where people are having conversations. And Caroline, you mentioned the language we used, and they use language in such a brilliant way because they bring everyone on a journey with them and make them part of the solution. So you feel like you're delivering good, you feel like you're doing. So when we interviewed Seth Godin, he talked about status and how we need to start, making status and feeling good something that people really value again, as opposed to owning things. And I think, the whole marketing profession, as we talk to people and as people talk back to us around how they feel now is sustainability is actually making marketing exciting again, in my view, and opening up all those other facets for us to explore, which it's, you know, I think it's one of the best times, you know, innovation and circularity, you know, thinking about how you wrap a service around something and retain your customers long term, as opposed to short term one-off transactions where you don't ever hear from them again and you don't know, you know, what they did or even if they liked your product.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because that has got harder and harder and less profitable. And yet too many organizations still, you know, trapped in that dynamic and trapped in that paradigm. And in fact, what they, you know, if you're going to be marketing centric, you're going to be customer centric, aren't you? Market centric. And if you think about the customer, you really understand what they want. And what they want isn't a new thing. What they want is an experience, a feeling, some well-being, whatever it might say. It's an outcome that they're after, not a thing that they buy. And it may be that buying a thing gets you there, and it may be doing something else gets you there. And as marketers, we can help them plot that path. We can story tell to show them those paths, can't we? We can. Give them examples of other people who've got what it is they're looking for. And it is interesting. We sort of trapped ourselves in the world of, I don't know, probably this is a bad thing to say, but the world of FEs, you know, marketing effectiveness, you know, pipeline yield, you know, is it better this week than last week? And blah, blah, blah. And
ROAS.
These things are sort of important. But we're kind of missing the point if we're not really out there understanding exactly what it is the customer is seeking.
Exactly.
And when that return of the sharing economy, you know, Paul and Anna and I talk about, you know, Olio and the fact that it's so well done, but it's done not, you know, the marketing is well done, it's all word of mouth, the communities, the sharing, the building, and it's more sustainable and it's better for planet, it's better for society and all of those things. And I think, you know, now we have an opportunity to, as marketers, to build communities and talk to our communities as just supposed to that one-on-one faceless transaction over social media or you know, as an online purchase where prices become the default reason to buy something. I mean, I often talk about, it's like screwing the tops on toothpaste in a factory, isn't it? That's how it became, where there was really nothing, you didn't really think, did you? You just did. And there's nothing really exciting about just doing every day.
Commodity was never very sexy, was it?
No. And bringing your audiences with you, you know, this is the beautiful thing. I mean, Gemma mentioned Olio there. We interviewed Tessa Clark, their founder. We interviewed Jamie Crummy, and you know, there is this sense of what they're creating is such a celebration when you participate in their service. You yourself feel very validated as a human being for doing good as well, and they make that really clear. And the language they use, we particularly love, is like, you rescue food. I mean, who doesn't want to rescue this food that would ordinarily, or rescue something that would, I mean, you're becoming a little superhero, aren't you? You know, you're doing all these little good deeds by doing that. So how do we as marketers excite our customers to be that and to feel those things that are way more meaningful and bring them on that sustainable journey with us? And I think that's a really exciting question for marketers to be solving and to be asking themselves, and a problem where that is missing to be solving.
Yeah, absolutely. And in defining how it is that they satisfy those customer needs, and which could be really very, very different to, I've always been fascinated in this. Rory used to talk about this a lot, about, you know, why is it that BA didn't become the market leader in virtual communication, given that their business class travel was predominantly used by lots of people like us to get face-to-face meetings. And, you know, as that became less and less affordable, attractive, affordable for the planet, affordable for your budgets, whatever, how is it that they didn't go there, didn't think, oh, and it is that ability to do that sort of lateral thing, isn't it? To
absolutely.
Say, they're my customers, and I understand, I know so much about them. I should find new ways of meeting their needs rather than just finding better, faster, fancier ways of doing the thing I've always done.
And we interviewed Gustav Marta, didn't we, from the head of creative now at Greenpeace Nordic, and he talked about exactly that. He did was it with Swiss Air that he did it, or Swedish Airlines? I can't remember the exact organization that he worked with, and that's exactly what they did, Caroline. He said, you know, what are we really? You're a travel company. It doesn't matter about flying. You could get people there on train, you could get people there via virtual Zoom. You know, you are about connecting people and meeting people, and they did. He got them changing that business for a couple of years until the shareholders came in and said, oh, it's not working quite as we want it to, and we want these quarterly returns, and so we're going to go back to what we were doing before. So you know, again, this comes back to that appetite and that strategic intention.
The other thing that I think is really interesting about this is there's clearly a very strong moral argument, ethical argument for being big businesses becoming more sustainable for themselves and for the rest of us. But there's also, and you've touched on this a few times already, there's also some really good classic business strategic reasons to want to do it. You know, good business is good business kind of thing. How do you see the balance of that at the moment, and how do we enlighten more people, more organizations to see the benefit to them? Because, you know, we all know that people at the moment are more focused on, they're more switched on to switching off the lights, if you see what I mean, because electricity prices are so high. And so that enlightened self-interest is playing out. How do we get that, more of that in business?
I think it's one of the most sort of the questions we've been asking on the podcast for the last 18 months is, how do you balance people, planet and profit? You know, because the language, I mean, often when I was at CIM, it was always a case of, oh, but marketing needs to learn the language of finance to build the business case. And by the time I left, I was like, actually, no, finance needs to understand the language of marketing so that they understand what's happening out there in the real world, and not just what's on the spreadsheets, which always went down well. So I think, you know, we haven't got to that actual answer yet, but we do often point people to the work that, you know, social impact companies are doing and the success they're having, but also the fact that given the change in, you know, the stakeholder chain and the fact that employees are now the most valuable members of the stakeholder chain, you know, those generations coming through, they're the ones that are going to start, you know, voting where they want to work. And I think that this short-term view that businesses have is gonna start to impact them in a negative way if people don't want to work for them, you know. So I think unless they start to see that bigger picture, and I guess it's like anything, isn't it, in terms of looking at the bigger picture and being more long-term, then I think just by the very nature of the fact that organizations will find it hard to attract talent and retain talent will be a really, really big sort of signal that it's time to rebalance that focus away from just profit. But that gives me also some hope that stakeholder chain has changed.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, there is that piece around the stakeholder is changing, enforcement, regulation. I mean, pretty much everybody you speak to say, oh, regulation's coming, regulations come, you know, so it's almost like if you're not going to do it naturally, it will be enforced upon you. And so do you want to be a pace setter and get ahead of all of that, or do you want to become a blockbuster? You know, I mean, it is that, where do you want to sit with regards to this, and are you dragging your feet? We interviewed Philip Kotler, which was, you know, brilliant, and one of the things he said is there just aren't enough exemplars right now to raise the bar for everybody. He said, I'm sad to say it, but there just aren't, and that's where we need to get to. And those exemplars, we need to be absolutely cheerleading them and holding them up and showcasing just how brilliant they are. And I suppose that we are in this transitional switch, aren't we? I mean, it feels like everybody you talk to at the moment is talking about sustainability. And again, maybe, you know, not in all circles, but it's definitely more, even at that organization, that event that I talked about, sustainability was on the agenda, hence why I was there. So, you know, maybe 2-3 years ago, they wouldn't have even had somebody coming to talk about it. So they weren't necessarily doing anything about it, but they were at least opening the conversation about it. So so I suppose things are just, it feels like things are just starting to shift with that perspective. So hopefully more exemplars will come, so we don't just all talk about, you know, the handful that everybody keeps pointing back to, and that becomes business as usual.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's always interests me is it's when you start to get some of the big mainstream, you know, so you talk about Tony's Chocolate Only, it's when you've got Nestle and
Yes.
you know, and everybody on that path.
Yeah,
that's when your exemplars start to, I think that's when they really start to scare the other guys, because
exactly.
there's an element of small niche, yeah, it's all very good and everything, but they don't really scare them competitively, perhaps.
Yeah.
And I know that we did an exchange, I think it was more than a year ago, Paul and Anna, on modern slavery, and
Yes,
from Whitbread, you know, and they're interesting, different issue, but similar thing. They're interesting because they're big and mainstream, and they are being quite open and saying, we know we have this in our supply chain, but we'll only find it and get rid of it if we know that if we're honest and open enough to say it's there. And I found them to be very refreshing, because we know there are other companies out there who have a similar perspective but are absolutely terrified to admit to it, you know. And you know, as I say, it's a different angle, but it's a similar challenge, isn't it? It's like, you know, getting that sort of tipping point of organizations who are willing to stick their heads above the parapet, and figure this out.
I also think the investment piece as well. So reading yesterday that Lloyds and HSBC are now no longer going to invest in new fossil fuel projects is, you know, that's a big piece of news, you know, given that they were some of the biggest investors. And I think, you know, investment risk, you know, in relation to climate change is starting to really probably prick their conscience now, and that was super encouraging yesterday. So I think that finally that financial pressure is coming in.
Yeah, which is and you know, honestly, those are some of the really pivotal things that will happen, aren't they? That will force organizations to scurry, and with your help, many marketers, you know, across industries will already have their heads around this, so they'll be ready to capture that willingness to engage, which perhaps, you know, their thoughts were falling on deaf ears before. Before we open it up to everybody else, I want to be really mean to you two guys, and I want to do to you what you do to your podcast guests. So 3 quick questions, and guess what they are? You'll know the questions, so I bet you've got brilliant answers. So the first one is odd, given a bit of our earlier conversation. Can marketing save the planet? May I just rephrase that and say, can marketing save humanity?
Yeah.
I think marketing, as is the answer that we've collected along the way, and we believe ourselves. Yes, it's a massive enabler in speeding up progress, and how we talk about things and communication and language we use. I think it plays a huge role, but it can't do it alone.
Absolutely, amen to that. Michelle, anything to add on that one?
I mean, that is the answer we've heard. It's the answer that we kind of nod, you know, along to, because we fundamentally definitely believe that marketers are perfectly positioned to be a significant part of the solution. You know, we are part of the challenge, you know, and we have this choice. Do we you know, Wim Vermeulen recently on our latest podcast said, every time we're doing anything, marketers need to be asking themselves, is what I am putting out there and is what I am planning working towards a positive outcome or working towards the negative outcome, you know, and where do I sit? And so, yes, absolutely, marketing has that opportunity. If it's courageous as well, I would add in there, you know, this isn't just about being educated and aware. You may have to get a little bit uncomfortable and inconvenient, and we've got to be courageous to do that. So so that is, it doesn't mean aggressive, it doesn't mean off, it doesn't mean any of those things. It just means having the courage to get uncomfortable and ask those potentially inconvenient questions.
Yeah, and I swear, I drove a lot of people mad in IBM, and managed to persuade a number of people to take some fairly significant risks, but they paid off enormously. Yeah. They paid off enormously because it enabled us to engage with clients. I mean, being a big B2B, obviously, but engage with clients in ways that we just hadn't before. We suddenly had relationships in the C-suite that with the finest work we'd done, we'd not managed to secure. So it was a really interesting lesson, more gut instinct than any expertise on my part. But anyway, it worked. Yeah. Okay, what do you hope business will look like 10 years from now?
I'd like business to be, sounds strange, kinder, and do more for society, because I think often, and we've spoken to a couple of our guests on the podcast who say, actually, and I'm all for collective action and for people to believe that they've got more power than they think they have. But, for every pound we spend, we're choosing whether an organization exists. We all think business holds the power because they've got all the money, but actually they don't. So I'd like businesses to actually look at themselves and go, do you know what, we need to be kinder to the people that invest in us, because actually they're way more important than we believe them to be.
Yeah. I really agree with that.
And mine really aligns with Paul's work, really, and the question that he raised when we were at our little podcast get together with all our podcast guests. And, we've got some pretty big problems going on in the world, and I would like businesses to be focused on those problems, so that collectively we are working more collectively, and that our business has got more meaningful outcomes. So business is way more meaningful. Purpose actually is doing what it says it's doing, and that we are solving bigger problems rather than just thinking about, how we can fill our own pockets.
Yeah, I like that. And a piece of advice on how you get started.
Educate yourself. Simple.
Yeah. And to do that, you can go over to our learning zone. It sounds like a QPC advert. But you know what, this learning zone, I'm so proud of this little learning zone that we've put together, which is really just cobbled together. People are now telling us how we need to order it and create it and do different things to it. But, we've just thrown it up there because we want to get stuff done. But effectively, what we're hearing is from a number of organizations now that have tasked their employees with doing the 100 points challenge. So we've created a learning zone. We put resources on there that we think are useful, that we've found useful, that, there's all sorts of different things on there, from podcasts to reports to research items to books, that all sorts of things that for sustainable marketing. And it only goes on there if we genuinely think it's useful. And then we've put little points, so 5 points for a podcast, 10 points for this, 25 points for a book. And organizations have tasked their employees with doing the 100-point challenge. And what's wonderful to hear is that we're now getting the emails back from people saying, I did this, and now my husband, who's always been skeptical, I showed him this, and now he's on board and he spoke to his workmate. So all of a sudden you've got this almost little tendrils of wonderful communication and education. People because once you know stuff in this area, it's really nice to talk about it and share it. Yeah. And so people are doing that, which is really exciting. So I would say educate yourself. That starts with education. And you don't have to go to business school. You don't have to go and, become a climate scientist. You don't have to, you can literally just go and start learning. And once you start, you just will not want to stop, because it's interesting and it's personal. This is meaningful stuff. This is about saving civilization and humanity, your family, your children, your nieces, your whatever. And so it feels like important work to do. And of course, it's all relevant to our industry. And so it's why wouldn't we want to continuously keep learning?
Yeah, I know. Well, so that's a good point to press the pause button for a moment. Let's open it up. If those who aren't on camera, maybe you'd like to switch your cameras on and come join the fun. but really interested to open it up and hear what other questions you might have for Gemma and Michelle. And I suspect Gemma and Michelle may have some questions for all of you as well. I warn you,